You're listening to
DNA ID.
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1994. Around 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, April 23rd, June Nicholas pulled up outside the Pompano Beach, Florida home of her elderly aunt, Lillian. Lillian lived alone in a small 2-bedroom house, and June took care of her and often dropped off food. That's what she was doing today. She parked her car and got the bags out of the back and walked up to the small home, getting her key out of her pocket to open the door. She didn't need it. Climbing the stairs to the porch, June noticed right away that the front door was slightly ajar and the screen door unlocked. She cautiously pushed the door open, peering inside and calling, "Auntie, where are you?" The house was quiet. June put down the food and stepped into the bedroom where she knew her aunt slept. Perhaps she was taking a nap. She wasn't. Lillian lay on her bedroom floor, face up. Her nightgown was pulled up to her chest and she wore no underwear. Blood stained her head and face. June called the police immediately, although I don't know if she used an extension of the house phone or a neighbor's phone. Then she waited outside. Pompano Beach Police Department Officer John Gill was dispatched on a sick person call to Lillian's house at 5:41 p.m. He arrived at the home located at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue at 5:46. When he arrived, he met fire and rescue personnel Miguel Ruiz and Nathaniel Roy. They and June proceeded to the back southeast bedroom. Lillian was lying in an east-west direction with her head to the east, on her back but slightly on her left side. Blood was on her forehead, cheek, and nose. The EMTs felt for a pulse, but Lillian was dead. It appeared she'd been dead for several hours. A piece of white fabric with dried blood on it lay on the floor next to Lillian. Officer Gill guessed that it was her underwear. A quick look around told him that Lillian had likely not died of natural causes. For one thing, there was the blood and the pulled-up nightgown, and two, the room had been ransacked with drawers pulled open and so on. It was looking as though Lillian was murdered and possibly raped and robbed as well. The medical examiner was summoned and the homicide investigation began. Detective James Pendergast, who would lead the investigation, arrived to take in the scene, along with Detective James Green, Detective Randall Cobb, Lieutenant O'Brien, and Sergeant Van Heidsma. The medical examiner, Michael Bell, responded to the scene and checked over Lillian's body. Then Gator Express employees Garcia Reyes and Cedric Wilkes transported her to the medical examiner's office. Dr. Bell determined that Lillian had a fractured nose, multiple broken ribs, and a broken wrist. She had abrasions and contusions around her mouth where she'd been hit. Contusions on her body, specifically on her chest wall, her hands, and her right wrist, indicated that she had struggled with her attacker. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to manual strangulation with blunt trauma to the head. The manner of death was homicide. Lillian Nicholas was born on September 30th, 1904 in New York. She lived in the Empire State for decades, working as a nurse and a teacher. Lillian married Peter Decloe in the Bronx when they were both in their 50s in 1956. Peter died in 1966, and Lillian moved to Pompano Beach, where her niece June Nicholas lived with her family. Lillian was very close with her relatives in Florida who cared for her and stopped in to visit her and bring her food on a daily basis. After Lillian's murder, her extended family in Florida spoke with the Miami Herald. They reported that Lillian was long retired at age 89 and lived on a fairly meager fixed income. She rarely had more than $50 cash on hand. Whoever broke in, if they were hoping to rob her of her valuables, must have been disappointed. Neighbors told the Herald that Lillian, quote, was a homebody but spry for her advanced years. A strong woman with a 5-foot frame, she was often seen outside her neat home, tidying up with a broom or rake or watering her plants, end quote. Lillian's small home had a yellow brick facade and canary yellow shutters, a bright, sunny look that matched her disposition. Lillian was the kind of old lady who still wore dangly earrings and lipstick, kept her white hair short, and wore house dresses and big glasses and headscarves and hats. My point of view is that this was done by somebody just picking on an old lady to rob, said Lily Johnson, a neighbor and friend. Years later, Lillian's niece June said that the whole event was so traumatic for her, she took a year off work and had a relative watch her kids because she couldn't cope with her emotions. Lillian was extremely important to June and the others in the family, and her brutal murder was just unthinkable to those who loved the near nonagenarian. As I mentioned, the scene in Lillian's bedroom indicated a ransacking, but there was also clear evidence of a struggle. Lillian had put up a fight. A floor lamp and a white fan had been toppled over, and on top of them lay an old patchwork blanket that was smeared with blood. Officer Gill's notes indicate that it looked as though someone might have wiped blood off their hands onto the blanket. Even more disturbing was that on the floor next to Lillian's body was the receiver of the telephone, the handpiece. The cord which connected the receiver to the base had been ripped out of the receiver, and the base lay under Lillian's body. It was evident that she had been trying to call for help, and whoever killed her violently ripped the phone cord out. And police wondered whether the beating had been inflicted on Lillian using the phone receiver, which in those days was a quite heavy piece of dense plastic. The room had been tossed. The 2 feminine white dressers' open drawers spilled out their contents. On the stained yellow rug lay various items, a white piece of clothing that looked like a robe stained with blood, a bill, bank cash deposit bags and purses also lay on the floor. The closet door gaped open, the contents disrupted. On the bed, the fitted sheet was pulled up, the mattress was pulled off the box spring, and the entire bed had been moved away from the wall. Someone was looking for something, and they hadn't stopped with Lillian's bedroom. The other bedroom also had drawers ripped open and the closet opened and rifled. The window in this room was slightly open. The back door, like the front door when June found it, was slightly ajar. Crime scene investigators Monica Datz and Robert Holbrook arrived and began their analysis and evidence collection. The windows on Lillian's yellow-sided house were the kind that opened horizontally. Each window had a sliding half set in an aluminum window frame. Lillian's bedroom window was open, and the text noted a trail of sand on the bed below the window. It appeared someone might have stepped through the window onto the head of the bed and tracked sand across the bed before stepping onto the floor. Footprints on the exterior wall below the bedroom and the screen having been removed and set against the outside wall under the window solidified the theory that someone had climbed in that way. Unfortunately, heavy rain that day had erased any footprints on the ground. The CSIs collected several pieces of evidence at the scene. One of these was multiple sets of latent fingerprints. They were theorized to belong to the suspect because the same prints were found on the exterior northeast bedroom window frame, the window through which it was suspected the killer entered the home, and throughout the house where he had torn through Lillian's things. These prints proved not to be a match to Lillian and were the best pieces of evidence the investigators had in 1994. CSI Holbrook ran the prints through the Palm Beach Police Department computer system and found no matches. So they were submitted to the FDLE, or Florida Department of Law Enforcement, for comparison in APHIS. The latent lift cards were eventually sent to the FBI lab where no identifications were made. The detectives could not immediately determine whether anything was missing from the house. Lillian's everyday purse was not located, but June told them that Lillian didn't have any money in the house except for maybe a nominal amount, $10 to $20 at the time. By the time they finished going through the home, a gold wedding band was the only thing that was thought might have been taken besides the purse, but no one was really certain. Lillian was somewhat independent, and it was unclear whether she might have hidden, lost, or sold the ring. Dispatched along with Officer Gill, Officer D. King conducted a neighborhood canvass to see if anyone had seen or heard anything. Lily Johnson, Lillian's next-door neighbor, last saw Lillian on Thursday morning. June, Lillian's niece, had last seen Lillian on Thursday around 6:30 p.m. Jenny Jackson, who lived at 1560 Northwest 7th Avenue, had seen Lillian on Friday the 22nd in the morning hours sweeping her front porch. Joe Clark last saw Lillian on Saturday the 23rd around 6:50 in the morning. He was noted to possibly be the last person to have seen Lillian alive. He told police that Lillian was standing by the front fence of her yard as he was taking out his garbage. It was possible she was going out to buy the paper or coming back from doing so. Other reports say when Joe saw her, she was sweeping the sidewalk in front of her house. Joe told the canvassing officer that Lillian had memory issues. The week before, he had had to help her back to her house because she couldn't remember how to get back there from the corner stop sign, which was only 3 houses away. Despite all these sightings of Lillian over the days leading up to her murder, no one saw anything suspicious or out of the ordinary. And this was somewhat shocking because if Lillian was indeed alive on Saturday morning at 6:50 and was dead on Saturday afternoon at 5:30, the break-in, struggle, and violent slaying had happened in broad daylight. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's face it, everyone could benefit from a little therapy. Think of it as the ultimate gift to yourself, working on becoming the best version of you. One of BetterHelp's 30,000 credentialed therapists can help you get there. And you don't have to wrestle with transportation or go sit in a waiting room. BetterHelp is entirely online, offering maximum convenience to the over 5 million clients worldwide who've taken advantage of all that online therapy has to offer. And it's affordable with no overhead for office space or receptionists. You can switch therapists easily and free until you find the one that's just right for you. If you've ever considered therapy, this is an efficient, convenient, and reassuring way to give it a try. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain by trying BetterHelp. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DNAID today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/DNAID. 2 days after the murder, Pompano Beach police spokeswoman Sandra King said to the media, quote, "Right now we have nothing. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. At this point, we are urging anyone who saw anything to call us. Some kind of human monster is walking around freely with the blood of a harmless 89-year-old woman on their hands." End quote. Lead Detective James Pendergast met with and called relatives of Lillian's both in Florida and in New York to try to gather information on anyone who might have wanted to hurt her, and a few potential suspects came up. June's daughter Katina Beach spoke with Officer R. Gangahar at the scene and exclaimed, "I know who did it. I bet Bill, the man who takes care of the bills, did it." June told the officer that a man named Bill Berger had been doing Lillian's bills for her and also did general errands for her, mowed her lawn, ran out for groceries, and so on. Bill would certainly know that Lillian lived alone, but he would also know that there was little in her home to steal, and he had keys to her house. He certainly would not have needed to climb awkwardly in through a bedroom window. Bill was ruled out by police fairly quickly. But then another potential suspect came up. When Lillian was first discovered dead in her bedroom, a man I'm calling Dean Nicholas, Lillian's nephew, showed up at the scene and came inside with detectives. This made June wonder how Dean had heard about the murder so quickly. She told Detective Pendergast that she wondered whether he could have done it. She said the first thing Dean asked when he showed up at the house was not how's Lillian or what happened, but where's her silverware? June said Dean had a drug problem, which of course he would need to pay for somehow. Detectives noted that some members of June's family expressed very negative feelings toward Dean. In short, most of them pointed the finger at him as the likely culprit. Detective Pendergast tracked down Dean on the 23rd and talked to him about the murder. Dean was very cooperative and expressed sincere-seeming concern about what had happened to his aunt. He vowed to ask around the neighborhood to see what he could find out. Detective Pendergast asked Dean to submit to a polygraph test about whether he had harmed Lillian. The file indicates he passed with flying colors. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood again, asking residents if they had any information. They soon heard the name Danny Keith. Several people had told the investigators that they heard that Danny had a hand in Lillian's murder. Danny had a significant criminal record, with 9 arrests in Miami-Dade County between 1988 and 1994 for burglary of occupied dwellings, drugs, tampering with a witness, and resisting a police officer. He also reportedly had broken into a number of homes in Lillian's neighborhood. Dean also told Detective Pendergast that they should take a look at Danny, but they couldn't find Danny. It turned out he knew they were looking for him, and he was in hiding at the home of a relative. Detectives Iannucci and crew finally busted him there and brought him to the Pompano Beach police station for questioning. Danny told them he was homeless due to Hurricane Katrina, and he'd come to the area after that storm from the Homestead area. He admitted that he had burgled some homes, which they could see from his record, and that he'd been hiding from the investigators because he heard they were looking for him. But he said he absolutely had not broken into Lillian's home, and he was not a murderer. They ran Danny's prints against the prints found on the window and other places throughout Lillian's house, and they weren't a match. Detective Pendergast's report reflects that the Pompano Beach police let Danny go due to a lack of evidence. Next up on the potential suspect list was Wilbert Clay. Wilbert had very recently been released from prison and had returned to Pompano Beach. He had a record for crack possession, burglary, and violent crimes, and had exhibited some disturbing and destructive criminal behavior. Detectives started looking for Wilbert, and unlike Danny, instead of hiding, he walked right into the Pompano Beach police station and offered to meet with investigators. Wilbert told them he hadn't killed Lillian, but he'd heard on the street that Danny Keith did it. The police had no reason to keep Wilbert. They had only his record as any indication that he might have killed Lillian, and they turned back to Danny Keith. They had received information that Danny's sister had heard Danny talking about the murder and confessing to his involvement. Detective Pendergast went to talk to Danny Keith's family. They denied any knowledge that Danny was involved in any kind of murder. By the way, Wilbert went on to be officially labeled a career criminal in Broward County after an aggravated battery arrest in 1995 and a drug arrest in January of 1998. In October 98, he was arrested for coke possession and aggravated battery of a pregnant individual, and his charge was career criminal felony. But none of his crimes were similar to what was done to Lillian. Detective Pendergast's report, dated October 24, 1994, reads, quote, "The investigation at this point has not revealed any clear suspects, so assigned detective went to the community for their help," end quote. This was a last-ditch effort to generate tips. A flyer was generated and posted throughout the neighborhood to raise awareness about Lillian's unsolved murder, including a Crime Stoppers tip line number. Detective Pendergast arranged with the Nicholas family to put up a $1,000 reward for information, hoping the money would be helpful in motivating someone in the working-class neighborhood to come forward. And one good tip did come in. The Crime Stoppers tip line received an anonymous tip that the suspects from a recent homicide in Deerfield Beach had killed Lillian. There were 3 men involved, and one of them was named Floyd Madison. At the time the detectives received the tip, Floyd was sitting in the Broward County Jail on an armed robbery charge. Detectives Crew and Iannucci went to the jail to question him. In the interview, Floyd gave up some other robberies he'd done, but flat out denied killing Lillian or being in her home. One of his co-defendants, Excel Alexander, had been involved in an attempted murder robbery with a deadly weapon just 2 months before Lillian was killed. The investigators ran Floyd's fingerprints along with those of his co-conspirators, Excel Alexander and Freddie Redman, against those found in Lillian's house. They didn't match. Meanwhile, Lillian's extended family suffered a major schism because of the fallout from the murder investigation. Dean knew that June had given his name to investigators as the possible killer of their Aunt Lillian. That never goes over well at the family barbecue, and it seems that June and some others continued to believe that Dean was the culprit and let that be known. The family had split apart, and things must have gotten ugly because June had to change her telephone number. On April 26, 1994, Officer Jan Simpson of the Pompano Beach Police Department submitted some of the physical evidence in Lillian's case to the Broward County Sheriff's Office Crime Lab for early DNA analysis. The Crime Lab's report, dated April 28th, addressed to Detective Pendergast, says the evidence submitted was the materials from Lillian's rape kit, the oral swab, vaginal swab, anal swab, and a blood vial. The lab report says, quote, "Testing was negative on this evidence. It is not suitable for further analysis," end quote, and the "not" is in all caps. I presume this meant that, using their 1994 technology, no sperm was detected and therefore DNA was not available. Thank goodness they held on to the evidence anyway. The Pompano detectives continued to work the case, investigating the suspects I discussed a few moments ago as well as some others. But they hit a brick wall as far as connecting anyone to the crime. the police decided Lillian likely wasn't targeted. It was a burglary gone bad. Detective Pendergast's report dated late 1994 states that all leads had dried up. Quote, "At this time, this case will be pending due to a lack of investigative leads." In 1999, the Pompano Beach Police Department contracted with the Broward County Sheriff's Office to take over all their cold case investigations. The BCSO became the new custodian of the Lillian Decloe case file, and there it sat in a box for years. By 2004, the DNA era was well underway. Some items and evidence in Lillian's case had never been analyzed using modern DNA extraction techniques, and the Broward County Sheriff's Office felt it was time to change that. They still had items of physical evidence collected from Lillian's person and the crime scene. So, in January of 2004, Detective E. Hendel sent 2 items to the BSO crime lab for analysis: the multicolored blanket with yellow trim collected from Lillian's bedroom, and the short-sleeved pink and white striped button-front nightgown, which really looks more like a night shirt, that Lillian had been wearing. The crime lab's forensic chemist report said, quote, "Examination of the above-mentioned evidence revealed the presence of possible hairs and fibers on both items," end quote. I guess the BSO crime lab didn't have access to the most up-to-date DNA technology, because later in 2004, Homicide Detective R. Carmody sent cuttings from the blanket and from Lillian's nightgown to Bodie Technologies for DNA analysis. The BSO used federal grant money to fund the private lab's work on the samples. In its July 8, 2004 report, Bodie stated its testing detected the presence of semen on 3 separate cuttings from the nightgown. Quote, "The DNA results, sperm fraction, were interpreted as originating from a single male contributor. The epithelial fraction testing results were interpreted as a mixture originating from 2 contributors," end quote, including the victim and a foreign contributor, male, in origin. The foreign male DNA on all the nightgown cuttings was from the same person. So it was time to use the go-to resource for DNA investigations, CODIS. CODIS at the time required 13 STR loci, and those were all detected in the sperm fraction by Bodie, so the profile was good to go for an upload to the database. A Broward County Sheriff's Office CODIS administrator letter to Detective Carmody, dated April 1, 2005, informed him of the negative results of the state and national database searches. Future searches would be conducted, but they would also turn up empty. This was incredibly disappointing. The violent sexual assault and murder of an 89-year-old woman surely had not been carried out by a one-time offender, but the CODIS results indicated otherwise. Now that they had a single-source male DNA profile, the BSO crime lab was also tasked with performing testing against the DNA of suspects for elimination purposes. The first up was Dean Nicholas, the nephew who had been accused by family members way back when the crime first occurred. Buccal swabs from Dean were submitted to the crime lab for comparison against the DNA profile on the nightgown extracted by Bodie. The crime lab report in May 2005 informed the BSO that Dean was excluded as the contributor of the DNA on the nightgown. From that point on, the DNA of suspects in other violent crimes involving burglaries in Broward County were often tested against the suspect DNA in Lillian's case. Men like Jeriel Moreland, arrested in 1993 for cocaine distribution, grand theft, resisting arrest with violence, and burglary. But all this testing failed to turn up Lillian's killer. In 2019, the case was taken up by the BSO's new cold case unit. The 3 detectives and 1 analyst on the cold case team had over 300 cases to address. Detective Dave Towsley reviewed Lillian's case file and saw that there was an unidentified male DNA profile in evidence. So he came up with a to-do list. One of the tasks was to resubmit Lillian's nightgown, the source of this foreign DNA profile, for updated DNA testing. A BSO crime lab report dated October 20th, 2019, reported the results of their reanalysis of the physical evidence in Lillian's case. Once again, semen was detected on 3 separate cuttings from the nightgown. Blood was also detected on one of the cuttings. A DNA profile for Lillian was obtained from the blood dry down, taken from the tube of blood collected at her autopsy. The semen on all 3 of the nightgown cuttings was consistent with a single male contributor, and once again the contributor was not Dean Nicholas. But the investigators had a nice big juicy single-source male DNA sample to work with. Another Broward County Sheriff's Office crime lab report dated December 15, 2021, reported the results of their new analysis of the anal, vaginal, and oral swabs taken from Lillian at her autopsy. The lab report indicated that there were no interpretable DNA results from the anal swab, but a single male DNA profile was detected in the vaginal swab. However, the lab report says that it could not report on the consistency between the profile from the cuttings from the nightgown and this profile, quote, due to limited comparable data, end quote. What this meant was that they only got a partial profile off the vaginal swab. But Detective Towsley's report noted that the alleles identified in the partial profile matched exactly the same alleles in the full profile from the nightgown. In other words, while they could not say for a 100% fact that it was the same person, it very likely was. Detective Towsley also submitted the phone receiver from Lillian's phone, which, remember, had been found pulled out of the base, to see if there was any helpful DNA on it. The original investigators had surmised that the phone receiver might have been the item Lillian was bludgeoned with. But tests revealed no blood and no male DNA, so Detective Towsley concluded that it was more likely Lillian had just been hit with a powerful fist. Detective Towsley decided to give the fingerprints one more chance to turn up the killer. On May 18, 2021, he submitted the original print cards to the crime lab, but the lab labeled the prints, quote, of no value, a common term utilized to mean that there is insufficient ridge detail for interpretation due to smudging, smearing, faintness, or whatever. The prints were a bust. But all was not lost. Because the offender DNA in Lillian's case was a single-source complete male profile, it was eligible for familial DNA analysis. Florida is one of the 13 states who utilize this search mechanism. This is the definition from a report on current approaches in familial DNA searching from the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. Quote, familial searching, FS, is an additional search of a DNA profile in a law enforcement DNA database that is conducted after a routine search fails to identify any profile matches. The familial search process attempts to provide investigative leads to agencies engaged in the pursuit of justice by identifying a close biological relative of the source of the unknown forensic profile obtained from crime scene evidence. Familial searching is based on the concept that first-order relatives, such as a sibling or parent offspring, will often have more alleles of their DNA profiles in common than those of unrelated individuals. Familial searching involves a two-step process. The first phase of FS produces a candidate list from the DNA database ranked by likelihood ratio estimates supporting the specified relationship. For example, parent-offspring, full sibling, compared with the alternate hypothesis of being unrelated. The second phase of the process typically uses additional genetic testing, such as analysis with lineage markers, usually YSTRs, to confirm or refute the specified relatedness. All U.S. laboratories practicing familial searching follow a similar protocol of searching for potential relatives and ranking them based on meeting a minimal likelihood ratio value. A list of candidates is selected based on a minimum likelihood ratio, and a number of candidates are subjected to further lineage testing. Those states that currently conduct familial searching do so with only single-source samples. This includes DNA profiles that can be deconvoluted from mixtures. Currently, a full autosomal STR profile, i.e. those containing the 13 core STR loci, is necessary for a request for familial searching to proceed. Most laboratories currently analyze a full panel of 17 or more YSTR loci. Between true relatives, there may be a difference at one or two loci due to mutation. Okay, that was all a lot. So I emailed with Lee Clark, Deputy Director of Forensic Services at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and she told me in an email, quote, "We rank a large bank of candidates and then weed them out based on YSTRs. We are targeting father, son, and full siblings. And on a very rare occasion, it might be possible for someone more distant to share sufficient information simply due to chance and inheritance of the same alleles by descent. But it's also possible, albeit highly unlikely, for an unrelated individual to share DNA types and the same YSTR profile. This is again why direct comparison between the putative perpetrator and a crime scene sample is imperative." End quote. So in layman's terms, familial DNA searching works to identify people in a state's DNA database who share genetic and statistical similarities, indicating that they might be related, as a means to identifying possible suspects through DNA relatedness. In Florida, familial searching is a prerequisite to forensic genealogy. So in January of 2022, the BSO cold case investigators requested that the FDLE conduct a familial DNA search using the single-source DNA profile from Lillian's nightgown. In order to do this, a YSTR DNA profile had to be prepared for the suspect. This is because a familial search uses the STR DNA analysis to identify male arrestees and convicted offenders in the state's qualifying offender database who share certain alleles with the sample, and then it uses Y-DNA to focus in on men who share the same paternal lineage. Usually, this takes a pretty long time and can generate a lot of names of people who share similar genetic markers, even if they're not related. There is a 40% chance that any two people share an allele. Further, Y-DNA is passed down among male members of the same family, even distant relations. YSTRs are not unique. But here, there was a singular hit fairly quickly. The FDLE reported their search results on May 10, 2022. The report says, quote, "A qualifying offender that could be a male relative to the source of the DNA profile was identified," end quote. The DNA profile from Lillian's nightgown shared sufficient genetic similarities to one known offender in the database. Based on these genetic similarities, the man in the database was likely a first-degree relative to the suspect, i.e. a father, brother from the same father, or son. Well, it was the latter. The man whose DNA was in the state's DNA database was Johnny Mack Brown Jr., born on December 18, 1984. At least there's no question who his father is with that name. Jr. had racked up an arrest record starting in his early 20s. He had arrests in Polk County for possession of pot in 2006 and 2007. He was also arrested in 2006 for domestic battery. He was released, violated probation, and was rearrested in 2007 on that charge. Johnny Mack Brown Jr. was next arrested by Haines City Police in October 2010 on an active arrest warrant out of Orange County. The charges were possession of cannabis and a probation violation. Then, several run-ins with the law experienced by Jr. were in the company of a man named Lafayette Latrell Richardson. Lafayette was 5 years older than Jr., and I believe, based on my research on Ancestry and other websites, that they are half-brothers. Jr.'s mother is an M.R. Richardson Nelson, who is also the mother of Lafayette. Both young men were arrested in a home owned by her in 2014, which I'll get into in a moment. Just by way of background, Lafayette was convicted of a sex crime in 1999, listed as lewd assault sexual battery of a victim younger than 16. After he was released from prison, he was required to register as a sex offender, although it appears he failed to comply with this requirement. Anyway, here's how Johnny Mack Brown Jr.'s DNA got into the state's DNA database, where a familial search of the offender STR DNA profile from the Decloe case linked him to his father. Jr. was arrested on July 23, 2014 at 9:40 p.m. at 2416 Embry Avenue in Haines City for a probation violation. He appears to have been living at the home owned by his mother, M.R. Richardson Nelson. On that date, the Haines City PD got an anonymous call that Lafayette Richardson was selling meth out of his house. The caller said Lafayette had supposedly just gotten out of prison and was on probation and was, quote, pimping out a woman at the home. Haines City officers responded to the Embry Avenue house. Arriving there, they obtained consent to enter from one of the residents, a girl named Takasha D. She pointed them to the back bedroom where her father, Lafayette Richardson, was to be found. K-9 Officer Elon and his dog proceeded to the master bedroom where he found Lafayette Richardson and Johnny Mack Brown Jr. The officer observed 2 clear plastic baggies containing a green leafy substance, which tested positive for cannabis. The suspects were detained and Lafayette was found to have $1,500 in U.S. currency in his front pants pocket. The wad of cash comprised, quote, many smaller denominations consistent with that of street-level narcotics sales, end quote, according to court records. Further, the anonymous caller had advised that Lafayette kept his methamphetamine in his daughter's closet. That's nice. In the daughter's bedroom, they found a woman named Carolyn D. sitting on the bed. They removed Carolyn and searched the room and found a spoon, a plastic scale case, and multiple clear plastic baggies on the bed where she'd been sitting. The residue on the spoon and scale case was positively identified as methamphetamine. Quote, a suitcase was located on the shelf of the closet of the daughter's room. On top of this suitcase in plain view were 3 clear plastic baggies containing a crystal-like substance. 2 of the bags were found to contain approximately 14 grams and 126 grams of methamphetamine, end quote. More extensive searches of the house were authorized by the owner, M.R. Richardson Nelson, who said she was Takasha D's guardian, and confirmed for the officers that her son was Lafayette Richardson. But Lafayette did not pay rent and was not supposed to be at the house, although he admitted he was staying in his daughter's room. Searches revealed multiple items of drug paraphernalia, including a bong, a scale, baggies, and more green leafy substances inside baggies. Carolyn D. was reported to be a methamphetamine dealer by Lafayette Richardson. She, in turn, told the officers that she'd met Lafayette a couple weeks earlier and was sleeping with him in exchange for meth. She admitted to being a meth user but claimed that Lafayette was the one who was selling it. A quote from the report, Brown Jr. would spontaneously state that his girlfriend had a small bag of weed in his room. Both Richardson and Brown are clearly in violation of the standards of their probation by being arrested on new drug charges, end quote. Yes, it was true. Both guys were in violation of their probation through the plethora of criminal activities they were engaged in at this house. And this probation violation and the resultant DNA database entry would be what ended up naming Johnny Mack Brown Jr.'s father as the killer of Lillian Decloe. The original incident for which Johnny Mack Brown Jr. was on probation was an arrest on July 19, 2012, also at the Embry Avenue home in Haines City. On July 2, 2012, at approximately 10 a.m., Johnny Mack Brown Jr. entered a business called Amos's Tavern, located at 200 Highway 1792 North in Haines City. There, Jr. tried to cash a SunTrust Bank check in the amount of $546.98, a very random amount, made out to him. The payor of the check was Breed Allied Convention Services. Jr. handed over his Florida ID card as he attempted to cash his check. The cashier, Gerald Amos, was suspicious. He told Jr. that he didn't think the check was genuine and asked for another form of ID. A quote from the arrest warrant affidavit. The defendant then ran out of the business, end quote. Well, that's a surefire way to look guilty. Detective Nobry of Polk County checked with Breed Allied Convention Services, who confirmed that Johnny Mack Brown Jr. was not a current or former employee. They confirmed that the account number on that check had been inactive for over a year due to fraudulent activity. Detective Nobry showed Gerald Amos a photo array of 6 photographs that included Jr.'s photo. Presumably, Gerald Amos recalled the name on the young man's ID. Amos picked out photograph number 3, positively identifying Jr. as the man who entered his business and attempted to cash a fraudulent check. Quote, the defendant knowingly and intentionally intended to injure or defraud Amos's Tavern by attempting to cash the check to obtain money in the amount of $546.98. Johnny Mack Brown Jr. was charged with 1 count of uttering a forged instrument, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of grand theft more than $300 but less than $5,000. The case was adjudicated but eventually concluded when Johnny Mack Brown Jr. agreed to plead guilty in exchange for just 18 months probation and 100 hours of community service. So Jr. did no prison time on the forgery attempt, but when he was caught in 2014 in the presence of drugs and it was still within his 18-month probation period, he was in big trouble. Also, he had failed to complete the community service requirement. What a surprise. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison. In Florida, the offender DNA collection rule is as follows. Convicted offenders who are sentenced to state prison are required to submit a DNA sample to the state's convicted offender database. That DNA sample, which was collected from Johnny Mack Brown Jr. and added to the database, was what connected his father to Lillian Decloe's murder. Johnny Mack Brown Jr. sharing significant STR markers and a YSTR profile with the Lillian Decloe suspect significantly narrowed the suspect pool because Jr.'s parents, Mary R. Richardson Nelson and Johnny Mack Brown Sr., had only 1 child together. Jr. had no full brothers, so his father was very likely the suspect they were looking for. Some of you might be asking, well, how did they know it wasn't Johnny Mac Brown Jr. who had killed Lillian? Well, his DNA was in CODIS from 2014 on, and a standard CODIS search had found no DNA match between anyone in the database and the unknown Decloe suspect sample. Not until the state's DNA database was searched for offenders with STR markers in common with the suspect, and the same shared Y DNA, did they hit on Johnny Mac Brown Jr. What this told the investigators was that Johnny Mac Brown Jr. didn't do it, but a man in his immediate family did. Also, it's worth mentioning that Johnny Mac Brown Jr. was 9 years old when Lillian was killed. I like to think that it wouldn't have been possible for a 9-year-old to do what was done to Lillian, but nothing would surprise me anymore. As you heard, the Decloe suspect's name revealed through a familial DNA search was Johnny Mac Brown Sr., and he was dead and buried in South Florida National Cemetery in Lake Worth Beach, Palm Beach County. Because the suspect was a veteran and was buried in a military cemetery, the hurdles to obtaining clearance to exhume him were particularly high. The BSO detectives reached out to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, where Detective John Cogburn assisted them in obtaining a court order authorizing the exhumation on June 24, 2022. Then the exhumation had to be approved by the Veterans Affairs Legal Counsel. Finally, the exhumation took place at 9 a.m. on August 10, 2022. Present were Crime Scene Unit Detectives Williams and Walker, BSO Cold Case Homicide Unit Detectives Dave Towsley, Zach Scott, who I worked with on the Eileen Troopner Doe case last season, and Andrew Giannino, BSO Homicide Unit Supervisor Sergeant B. Tutler, Roberts Vault employees, forensic anthropologist D. Heather Walsh Haney from Florida Gulf Coast University, detectives from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and staff from the Veterans Affairs staff. It was quite a party. The suspect was buried in Section 39, Site 2528. The large marble headstone was removed, and Veterans Affairs staff dug the site and removed the top of the vault lid. Roberts Vault employees then removed the metal casket from the vault. The casket was placed into a temporary concrete vault, and the whole thing was loaded on a Roberts Vault truck. It all took an hour or so. At 10:15, all investigative personnel left the South Florida National Cemetery and followed the Roberts Vault's truck to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office District Office. At the Sheriff's Office, Dr. Heather Walsh Haney supervised the collection of part of the right tibia with tissue, 2 teeth, a canine and an incisor, a hair, and tissue from the left side of the head, and the 4th rib with attached tissue. Crime Scene Unit Detective Clint Williams assisted with the tissue collection and packaging. Everything was then sent to the BSO crime lab. The casket was resecured, and the suspect was reburied by about 1 p.m. At the crime lab, BSO criminalist Jennifer Parker harvested bone marrow from inside the rib and got a great sample. Ms. Parker's report was delivered to Detective Towsley on September 5, 2022. She compared the DNA from the rib bone of Johnny Mac Brown Sr. to the sperm fraction on the cutting from Lillian's nightgown. The DNA results were at least 4.5 trillion times more likely if they originated from the suspect, Johnny Mac Brown Sr., than if they originated from an unrelated, unknown individual. Then Ms. Parker compared the epithelial fraction from the cutting of Lillian's nightgown. The DNA results were at least 66.8 trillion times more likely to have come from Johnny Mac Brown Sr. than anyone else. Well, that settles that. So who was this guy who raped and murdered an 89-year-old woman? Johnny Mac Brown Sr. was born in Hawkinsville, Georgia, on January 16, 1954. I don't have any details on his early life, but he served in Vietnam as a U.S. Marine. Since he was born in 1954 and combat troops were out of Vietnam by May 1973, he had to have been very young when he served. His son Junior was born in 1974, but we don't know how involved Senior was in his son's life. And it seems he never really recovered and readjusted to civilian life after the war. His family, interviewed by Detective Towsley, said that he suffered from PTSD and became an alcoholic. His family consistently tried to help him, get him treatment, and so on, but he became homeless for a time in the 1990s and formed a crack habit. Johnny Mac Brown Sr. died of natural causes in 2010. Learning of his role in the murder of Lillian Decloe, his family was shocked but not surprised. Johnny Mac Brown Sr. was troubled, had mental health issues, and was drug addicted, a toxic combination. Johnny Mac Brown Sr. had quite an impressive rap sheet, although given the age of the records, I have virtually no details on most of his arrests. He was arrested on February 21st, 1976, by the Winter Garden Police Department for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He was charged only with a misdemeanor. Then he was arrested on July 9th, 1985, by the Pompano Beach Police Department for felony grand larceny. He was adjudicated guilty on July 30th, 1986, and sentenced to prison time in the Department of Corrections. He can't have served much time because he was arrested on July 7th, 1987, by the Broward County Sheriff's Office for a probation violation on the grand theft conviction. He was sent back to prison, but not for long. He was next arrested on June 30th, 1989, by the Pompano Beach Police Department for felony grand theft and dealing in stolen property. He was convicted of those charges on July 19th, 1989. Again, he did minimal time. Then Brown Sr. was arrested on November 15th, 1990, by the Pompano Beach PD for trespassing in a structure or conveyance. I would be curious to hear what this is about, but the records are long gone. Brown Sr. was next arrested by the Pompano Beach PD on June 13th, 1992, for marijuana possession, a misdemeanor. He pleaded no contest. On October 15th, 1994, he was arrested on a charge of aggravated battery of a female causing bodily harm, along with possession of cannabis, again by the Pompano Beach PD. This was for an attack on a Pamela H. Pam was 5 months pregnant and alleged that Brown pushed her with such force that she fell to the ground, landing on her back. Pam and another witness named Clemens alleged that Brown pushed her in the chest using a long stick. Brown told the responding officer, John Cottrell, that Pam called the police out of vindictiveness toward him because her baby's father was his brother and he refused to visit her. Brown was arrested and booked on aggravated assault charges, but it's unclear to me whether he actually did any time for this. Pam didn't realize how lucky she was to be largely uninjured. Brown had killed Lillian just 6 months earlier. The report on this assault states that Johnny Mac Brown Sr.'s occupation was a mechanic and his employer at the time was Superior Shade in Pompano Beach. I suspect he didn't hold that job down for very long. Then Brown Sr. was arrested by the Broward County Sheriff's Office at 11:30 p.m. on December 6, 2002. The charges were aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and lewd or lascivious molestation of a child between the ages of 12 and 16. Here is the description of what happened from the arrest report, using police speak. On December 6, 2002, Brown Sr. unlawfully molested the 14-year-old victim, Jasmine M., by grabbing her right breast on top of her clothing against her will. While grabbing the victim's breasts, the defendant asked, "When are you going to give me some of that?" Jasmine advised that she was in fear for her safety. An affidavit was signed by the victim's mother with her desire to prosecute. The defendant also unlawfully cut a male victim named Larry M., same last name as Jasmine, on the neck with a razor blade. Larry advised it was against his will and that he was in fear for his life. This cutting resulted in the aggravated battery with a deadly weapon charge, as the victim in that incident also signed an affidavit with his desire to prosecute and had to be hospitalized for medical treatment of his injuries. I don't have any more details on this incident, but I did note that the address where it occurred, 725 Northwest 15th Place in Pompano Beach, was just a house or two away from Johnny Mac Brown Sr.'s registered address at 709 Northwest 15th Place, not far from Lillian's home. It was dangerous to be Brown Sr.'s neighbor. To my surprise, somehow Johnny Mac Brown Sr. avoided state prison time for this incident. He was released from jail in March 2003 after a hearing on a defense motion to dismiss. On October 22, 2004, he was rearrested for a failure to appear, a first-degree misdemeanor. This was after getting pulled over and charged with driving with a suspended license on March 24, 2004. And that was the last recorded law enforcement interaction with Johnny Mac Brown Sr. He died 6 years later. So I know what you're asking. Why on earth did Johnny Mac Brown Sr. not give a DNA sample that was entered into CODIS? The answer is, as I stated earlier, the trigger for the Florida DNA collection law is a conviction resulting in a state prison sentence. Detective Towsley's notes say, quote, although he had been arrested several times over the years, he had never done state prison time and his DNA had never been entered into CODIS. End quote. Johnny Mac Brown Sr. had never done state prison time, only county prison time, since the passage of Florida's DNA collection law, and counties in Florida do not collect offender DNA. In other words, he slipped through the cracks. Detective Towsley wrote, On September 7, 2022, I received a memo from Broward County Assistant State Attorney Stephen Zachor stating that he had the opportunity to review the investigative materials and agreed with our conclusion that there is enough probable cause to believe that Johnny Mac Brown, Sr., deceased, was involved in the death of Lillian Decloe. Detective Towsley's final report, dated September 12, 2022, concludes, quote, "Due to the results of this investigation, I submit that if Johnny Mac Brown were alive today, there would be more than enough evidence to arrest and prosecute him for the murder of Lillian Decloe. Respectfully, I request that this case be exceptionally cleared." End quote. So how did their paths cross? Well, I mentioned earlier that Johnny Mac Brown Sr.'s registered address in the 1990s and 2000s was 709 Northwest 15th Place in Pompano Beach. This house was literally within 100 yards of Lillian's home, 5 houses down from hers. Interviews with both the Brown and Nicholas families revealed that as far as anyone knew, murderer and victim did not know each other. Brown Sr.'s family had never heard of Lillian, and June, who took care of Lillian, had never met or heard of Johnny Mac Brown Sr. His name was not in the Lillian Decloe case file. He did not come up in the police canvas of the neighborhood, even though his registered address was nearby. I was told that at the actual time of the murder, Johnny Mac Brown Sr. was homeless, so no one actually knew where he was. But clearly, he wasn't too far away. I think it's pretty easy to guess that Johnny Mac Brown Sr. knew of or at least saw Lillian in the neighborhood. He probably knew she lived alone and was vulnerable. Addicted to crack, he was almost certainly looking to steal anything he could to feed his habit, and he probably thought Lillian was the type to have cash or jewelry in her underwear drawer or under her mattress. Of course, the fact that he raped the elderly woman as she lay dying speaks to his depravity. He can't blame his addiction for that. Anyway, in a crime of opportunity, Brown Sr. broke in through the bedroom window sometime during the daytime when Lillian was home, although he might not have known that. He started tossing the bedroom looking for valuables. Lillian came in and confronted him and grabbed the phone to call 911. Brown Sr. did not want that to happen, so he ripped the phone cord out and attacked Lillian. We don't know what he stole other than Lillian's life and the dignity she had earned as she neared her 10th decade on the planet. So that is the tragic story of Lillian Decloe. I wanted to cover this case because absent a CODIS hit, it's a great example of how well familial DNA searching can work. Johnny Mac Brown Sr. is now known to be the killer of Lillian Decloe because after his son's DNA profile was found to share genetic markers with the killer's, Brown Sr.'s DNA was collected and compared to the DNA and evidence, proving that he was the suspect who had eluded police for years. I also wanted to cover this case because it received very little publicity. I felt compelled to memorialize Lillian, who made it to 89 years old, living a life of dignity and grace before this habitual offender callously took her life away from her. I can't speak to whether criminal propensity runs in families. The arguments about nature versus nurture persist. But it seems to me that more than just 13 states should be using familial DNA searching. It's a complex process that involves a lot of man-hours and can take investigators down some rabbit holes. But as this case shows, when it works, it's highly efficient and obviates the need for an expensive genealogy analysis, family tree building, and reference testing. One more thing. I know you're all wondering why Johnny Mac Brown Sr.'s fingerprints that he left at Lillian's house when he broke in and raped and killed her didn't identify him, considering the number of arrests that he had in the years prior to and after the murder. I don't know the answer to this definitively, but I suspect that the answer is what we heard earlier, that the prints were not really of a very good quality and were therefore unidentifiable by the computerized database systems. Thank you so much to Detective Dave Towsley of the BSO Criminal Investigations Homicide Cold Case Unit for speaking with me about this case. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.